breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks in between. It's an everyday sport now. Consuming food has become an all-day necessity, no matter what the diet is. Vegan, vegetarians, meat eaters, paleo diet, the list goes on and on. Doesn't even matter what we eat when we are constantly overwhelming our bodies with work. I mean, can you imagine having to extend your 8-hour shift into a 12-hour shift all the time? You can't even catch a break. Doesn't help when the food is an instant gratification now, a quick bite at a fast food restaurant. When our ancestors and hunter-gatherer cultures were prevalent, the meals they did consume was one that grew out of necessity. Food is a drug people have become dependent on, but it wasn't always that way. So, how did this happen? And where did this dogma and bad habit come from? Let's make sense of the way of eating we have today and look back in time to understand the evolution of these concepts and why you may want to eat one meal a day. Now let's dig deep and embrace the strange. Something Strange TV. Something strange about one meal a day. There's this age-old saying, eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. This may sound somewhat familiar, right? It's something that has been drilled into us throughout our childhood, that skipping breakfast can cause you damage. So-called benefits of this morning meal apparently includes boosting your metabolism, reducing hunger throughout the day, providing you with important nutrients that you may not get otherwise, and helping with concentration, yada yada yada. And similarly, the common schedule of breakfast, lunch, and dinner has been implemented in our daily schedule for as far back as we can remember in Western society. Even more decisive are the ideas about what should be eaten at each of these meals. Egg dishes and cereal are rarely seen outside of breakfast, while spaghetti and soup are seemingly verboten before noon. But reading a few articles, I've noticed that experts think that this militant 3-meal regimen is doing more harm than good. Actually, there was a definitive time in the history of our species, not so terribly long ago, when we had other ideas about how to manage our food intake. Since the paleo and slow food movements have renewed our interest in eating like our ancestors, maybe it helps to start there. Most ancient Egyptians ate just 2 meals per day, a breakfast or morning meal of bread and beer, and an evening meal that included meat, vegetables, and more bread. Ancient Greeks, on the other hand, often ate 4 meals a day, even having a special word for their Taco Bell style 4th meal, delenin. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Now, does anyone implement this lifestyle? Yes, the Ingalik hunter-gatherers of interior Alaska. As has been made clear, the principal meal and sometimes the only one of the day is eaten in the evening. The Guayaki hunter-gatherers of Paraguay, it seems, however, that the evening meal is the most consistent of the day. This is understandable since the day is generally spent hunting for food that will be eaten in the evening. The Kung hunter-gatherers of Botswana. Members move out of camp each day individually or in small groups to work throughout the surrounding range and return in the evening to pool the collected resources for the evening meal. Hawaiians, Tahitians, Fijians, and other oceanic people pre-Westernization. Typically, meals as defined by Westerners were consumed once or twice a day. The most consistent daily eating pattern that is beginning to emerge from the ethnographic literature in hunter-gatherers is that of large single meal, which was consumed in the late afternoon or evening. A midday meal or lunch was rarely or never consumed, and a small breakfast consistent of the remainders of the previous evening meal was sometimes eaten. Self-snacking may have occurred during daily gathering. However, the bulk of the daily calories were taken in the late afternoon or evening. This pattern of eating could be described as intermittent fasting, relative to the typical Western pattern, particularly when daily gathering or hunting were unsuccessful or marginal. There is wisdom in the ways of our hunter-gatherer ancestors, and perhaps it is time to rethink 3 squares a day. But what about grazing? This notion of grazing, or eating small meals or snacks throughout the day, is an unnatural situation. It is directly contrary to the evolutionarily more appropriate large meal followed by periods of no eating or small occasional meals. I stress this point because I see that the notion of grazing has seized hold of many people's thinking. In my view, grazing is a destructive practice that is self-indulgent, unnecessary, and simply fulfills the perverse non-stop hunger impulse fueled by modern carbohydrate foods. Eliminate wheat, cornstarch, and sugars, and you will find that grazing is a repulsive impulse that equates with gorging, especially when the foods that I've just mentioned is very popular in the morning. I mean, look how much sugar we are starting our days with. Now, what's a good source of energy? Well, ketones. See, glucose, the sugar found in your blood, is usually the brain's main fuel. Unlike muscle, your brain can't use fat as fuel source. However, the brain can use ketones. Your liver produces ketones from fatty acids when glucose and insulin levels are low. Ketones are actually produced in small amounts whenever you go for many hours without eating, such as after a full night's sleep. However, the liver increases its production of ketones even further during fasting, or when carb intake falls below 50 grams per day. Although most of the brain can use ketones, there are portions that require glucose to function. On a very low carb diet, some of these glucose can be supplied by the small amount of carbs consumed. The rest comes from a process in your body called gluconeogenesis, which means making new glucose. In this process, the liver creates glucose for the brain to use. It manufactures the glucose using amino acids, the building blocks of protein. The liver can also make glucose from glycerol. This is the backbone that links fatty acids together in triglycerides, the body's storage form of fat. Thanks to gluconeogenesis, the portions of the brain that needs glucose get a steady supply, even when your carb intake is very low. Now, according to the available evidence, ketogenic diets can have powerful benefits for the brain. The strongest evidence has to do with the treating drug-resistant epilepsy in children. There is also preliminary evidence that ketogenic diets may reduce symptoms of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. Research is ongoing about its effect on patients with these and other brain disorders. Beyond brain health, there are also many studies showing that low-carb and ketogenic diets can cause weight loss and help treat diabetes. Eating low carb isn't the only way ketones increase. Fasting does as well. That's where the one meal a day benefits, because you're only eating one meal and the rest of the time you're fasting, which gives your body time to repair what needs to be repaired instead of focusing the majority of its energy on digesting, which can be very taxing. According to Voto Longo, a professor of biological science, during each cycle of fasting, this depletion of white blood cells induces changes that trigger stem cell-based regeneration of new immune system cells. In particular, prolonged fasting reduced the enzyme pKa, an effect previously discovered by the Longo team to extend longevity in simple organisms, and which has been linked in other research to the regulation of stem cells, self-renewal, and pluripotency. That is, the potential for one cell to develop into many different cell types. Prolonged fasting also lowered levels of IGF-1, a growth factor hormone that Longo and others have linked to aging, tumor progression, and cancer risk. pKa is the key gene that needs to shut down in order for these stem cells to switch into regenerative mode. It gives the okay for stem cells to go ahead and begin proliferating and rebuild the entire system, noting the potential of clinical applications that mimic the effects of prolonged fasting to rejuvenate the immune system. And the good news is that the body gets rid of the parts of the system that might be damaged or old, the inefficient parts, during the fasting. Now, if you start with a system heavily damaged by chemotherapy or aging, fasting cycles can generate literally a new immune system. Imagine working all day every day. Would you be able to maintain a clean house? No. The same for the body. Eating all day long pretty much takes away your body's opportunity to cleanse itself. I mean, it wasn't until the 19th century, Industrial Revolution, when many different industries and types of labor began to adhere to more similar and rigid schedules, that 3 meals per day became the indisputable norm. The only problem is that we can't seem to secure any concrete evidence that it's a nutritionally superior habit than any other number of meals. For years, there was an enthusiastic chatter about 5 or 6 smaller daily meals being the tried and true meal regimen for achieving weight loss. But a study found that the 5-meal plan doesn't really burn fat or regulate metabolism in any measurable way, although it might help to prevent you from overeating by reducing the likelihood of gorging after a long break between meals. Blood sugar begins to drop after 3 hours without food, and your last meal has basically been fully digested after 4. Make it to 5 hours between meals, and you're more likely to scarf down whatever's put in front of you, instead of eating mindfully and with restraint. A 2007 study from the National Institute on Aging Intramural Research Program saw benefits to eating just one big early evening meal per day and fasting the rest of the time around the clock. Actually had its own benefits. Meal skipping, although historically frowned upon by grandmas everywhere, can improve glucose regulation, though only when it corresponds with eating fewer overall calories. Light fasting has also been shown to fight chronic disease and increase overall lifespan. But that isn't to say that you won't feel grumpy when it comes to 4:30 p.m. and your belly is rumbling. But overall, putting hangriness aside, there isn't much science to rally behind 3 meals per day. In a 2004 report published in the Scandinavian Journal of Nutrition, eating behavior experts wrote, "No difference in total daily energy expenditure has been documented as a function of a daily meal number." So, what's the benefits of 1 meal a day? I'm glad you asked. See, most people cringe at the thought of missing a single meal. Intentionally missing all but 1 meal every day seems excessive and unnecessary, but proponents of 1 meal a day claim a multitude of benefits, including increased focus and productivity. Who hasn't hit that 2:30 p.m. slump at the office? 1 meal a day is said to eliminate the sluggishness people feel while digesting the lunch, because there is no lunch. Now, weight loss. It's extremely hard to be at a caloric surplus when you're eating 1 time per day. Even if your 1 meal is not healthy by normal standards, you're not taking in as many calories as you would if you were eating all day long. Now, diet freedom. You don't have to log calories or be eating out of Tupperwares. You'll free up a lot of mental energy when you don't have to plan 4 to 6 meals per day. Imagine how much time will be available to do other things. It's the same reason why Mark Zuckerberg wears the same style gray t-shirt at most public events. Why? He wants to clear his life to make it so that he has to make as few decisions as possible about anything. I mean, I don't expect you guys to apply this 1 meal a day plan, but it has its health benefits and it gives you more time to do other things, like watching more of my videos. Just kidding. No, but seriously, watch more of my videos.